All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for this workshop on the anatomy of a job application. My name is Eilish Russell. I'm one of two career advisors in the Creative Careers office. My colleague, Amy Gonzalez, and my other colleague, Roxanne Fenton, are joining us today. Thank you guys for being here. I'm really excited to chat through this topic today because I think that a job application form can sometimes feel a little bit intimidating. And I hope that over the course of our chat today, we can start to feel a little bit more comfortable about what we need to include in a job application and maybe what we can prepare in advance to make the process go a little bit more smoothly. So, our agenda for today. We're going to begin with a really quick introduction for kind of why this material is important and why it's helpful to know what we can expect in an application in advance. Then we're going to talk about what types of things we can prepare before we actually start filling out the application itself, the different elements of a job application. We're going to cover knockout questions and some of these kind of additional topics or areas of concern to keep in mind when filling out a job application. And we're going to talk about how we can follow up on a job application after we've submitted it very briefly. And then we're going to wrap up, kind of give a little summary of everything we've chatted about, and then talk about what else is coming up with the Creative Careers office and how you can get in contact with us. So let's start with our introduction. Job applications contain a lot of different elements. So do internship applications, for the record. And because there are a lot of different elements and a lot of different things that we need to share, it's really helpful to know in advance what you might need to fill out before you even start the application. Being prepared, knowing what type of information you need to share, is going to make the whole process a little bit less stressful. And especially for those of you who are maybe applying for quite a few internships or quite a few jobs at once, especially after graduation, it will really help ideally cut down on time and on stress and on a little bit of the mental thought process when you're submitting multiple applications at once. Staying organized, being prepared, all of these elements really, really help us to make the job search and internship search process a little bit less overwhelming because we can make it into kind of a strategy and an experience rather than something that we're kind of behind the ball on every time. Additionally, it's really, really important to follow application instructions exactly as they're written. We're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about this when it comes to certain types of questions. And this is for a few reasons. Number one, we want to make sure that we're providing an employer with all of the information that they need to consider our application in the exact way that they need it, right? If they want a certain type of style for our resume, or a certain type of style for our portfolio, we need to make sure that we're giving them exactly what they're looking for so that they can consider our application in the best possible light. But second, really following instructions to the T exactly as they're written shows that we have strong attention to detail. It shows that we can take instructions and follow them and ensure that we're, following those steps exactly as they're written out, which is really important regardless of the industry that you're going into. So you're going to hear me say quite a few times, make sure that you read your application and know the questions that you're responding to before you respond to them. But that's because this is really important. And demonstrating that strong attention to detail is going to be a skill set and a kind of a way of working that will benefit you regardless of your industry, your level of seniority, or where you're at in your career. So I want to start us off with a little kind of share out a word cloud today. I would love for everybody, for those of you who already shared in the chat, and for everybody who maybe didn't have a chance, to share with me what's the first word that you think about or that comes to mind when you think about having to fill out a job or an internship application. And what you can do, we're going to collect all of these answers in a word cloud on the screen. So what you can do is go to the QR code at the top left of the screen, or you can go to slido.com and type in this little string of numbers right here, and our answers will start popping up. So share with us, what's the first word that comes to mind when you think about filling out a job or an internship application? And we'll kind of talk through what some of those words are. I'm really excited to see. what folks share. Repetitive. Oh, that's a really good one. Absolutely. Labor intensive, complex. We got a fear in there as well. Absolutely. I would agree with all of these. Authenticity. Absolutely. I really like the word repetitive because it's true. Filling out job and internship applications can feel really repetitive, like we're doing the same thing over and over again. Unfortunately, part of that is just the nature of the application process. But again, I hope that some of the things we can chat through today will help make that repetitiveness feel a little bit easier to manage. Hopefully make that complexity feel a little bit easier to manage as well. Anybody else want to share? I also really like labor intense or labor intensive. This is a great word or a great thought in the sense that they do take time. And we're going to be talking about this towards the end a little bit, but it's really important when we're filling out an application to give ourselves plenty of time to complete it. Make sure that we're not rushing, that we're not speeding through anything, not just because we want to make sure that we're detail oriented, as we just talked about, right? But also because it's really important to create the best application materials possible for our own selves and our consideration for that role. Detailed and mechanization, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a bit of a mechanized process in some ways. There's still a human element in all job and internship applications, but it's good to know kind of how the process works and what some of the elements we're working with are. Very cool. All right. Anybody else want to share any last words or thoughts? I really appreciate this, and I love to see what people are thinking about when they think about applications. No? Okay. All right. Let's move forward. We can always kind of circle back to this. So I wanted to start our chat for today with some information about what we can prepare in advance of starting an application, as in before we click the Start Application button on the application screen in the company's website and actually start filling out our information. So let's run through some of these things that can help us make the process a little bit more timely, ideally a little bit less stressful. Number one, we want to make sure that we have our resume done in advance. And this is because our resume should be tailored directly to the position that we are applying for. It should be incorporating the keywords and skills that are in that job or internship description. And it should be written specifically for that role. The degree to which you have to tailor is going to depend on how different the positions you're applying for are, but it's really important to get into the habit of tailoring each resume that you send out. Some other things that we want to keep in mind for our resume as we're preparing it in advance of our application are the format of our document. Generally speaking, try to stick to a PDF or a Word document. If there is a specific request from the company you're applying for, you'll see it in the actual description. It'll say, please submit your resume in PDF form or in Microsoft Word form. If they don't give you a specific file format that they're looking for, you can use either, whichever you prefer. But again, keep in mind that they might make a specific request for you, and you should check in on that, make sure that you're able to submit the type of file that they're looking for. Our resume, as we just mentioned, it should be tailored to the opening. It should also be ATS friendly or applicant tracking system friendly. Now, for a much deeper dive into applicant tracking systems and how ATS can impact your resume, we're going to be sharing some links and resources in the chat. And I would really encourage everybody to schedule an appointment to chat with myself or with Amy about how ATS can impact your resume. But essentially, an applicant tracking system is a type of software that companies are using to organize and keep track of applications. And they are kind of how they can scan and read and understand your resume when you submit it through one of these online forms. So it's really important to make sure that the resume that we're submitting, that we've already created, is in an ATS-friendly format and that it's tailored to that particular position. We just saw through our little word cloud share out that the application process can feel kind of mechanized, right? And this is one of the ways that we can see that, or that we can start to feel like it's mechanized, or that there's maybe less of a human element when we're dealing with an applicant tracking system. However, there are lots of different ways that we can tailor and work with our resume to make sure that it's showcasing all the information that an ATS system might be looking for, as well as the human recruiter who is looking at our resume on the other end. And then the last thing that I want to note for resumes here is that we should use an easily identifiable file name. So they, again, might tell you specifically how they'd like you to name your file. If they don't, going with some variation of last name, first initial, or last name, first name, followed by what the document is, in this particular case, resume, is a really great way to make sure that it's easily identifiable that this document is your resume and that it belongs to you. It will also help you keep track of resumes as you are collecting them and creating them for different opportunities. What I would recommend not doing is having, resume V2, V6, part 5 as your file name. If it's something that you've tweaked and edited and made adjustments to, you potentially might remember that name, but this is a better way to make sure that your prospective employer, who you're ideally looking to share amazing info with, is going to remember your name and your details. Cover letters are also something that we want to prepare in advance of starting our application, right? We've already looked at the description of the job or the internship, and we're creating all of these materials before we even click apply. Again, this should be formatted in a PDF or a Word document. If there's not specific details about what form of document they want this submitted in, you can choose either. But know that these are going to be the two most accessible. And again, tailored to the opening, sharing specifically why you feel like you're an amazing fit, why this opportunity is an amazing fit for you, or why this company is an amazing company to match your skill set and your interests. And then ideally, if possible, directed to the hiring manager or to the design team that's reviewing your applications. And of course, same thing, identifiable file name. In this case, we're using last name, first initial, followed by CL for cover letter. Our next element here is portfolio. So generally speaking, you're probably going to be submitting your portfolio through your general portfolio website on your resume. And in this particular case, we want to make sure that our portfolio application, our portfolio information is hyperlinked on our resume when we submit it, right? So that it's clickable and that a recruiter or a prospective employer is able to easily access the portfolio directly from our resume. However, there might be some circumstances where an employer asks you to submit a curated PDF or slide deck or some other form of your portfolio for a specific application. Again, we want to make sure that we're really carefully following the instructions that we've been given so that we can share with them exactly what they need. If they list a specific number of pages or a specific number of projects they want to see, or even a specific format in terms of information, dates, details, we really want to adhere to that as much as we can. And again, for this, we want to make sure that we're including the identifiable file name, last name, first initial, underscore portfolio is a great option, and that we're following the submission instructions in the listing if we're not automatically linking it on our resume. This is something that recruiters across industries, but especially in creative arts and design fields, will share out when they talk about best practices, is making sure that you're submitting a version of your portfolio that is compatible with their application process. It's really, really, really important. not just making sure that it's hyperlinked if that's the way that they want it, but also that if they need something else, that you're able to provide that additional version of your portfolio. And then finally, references. So generally speaking, you're going to be asked to provide references in a job or an internship application that can be contacted and reached out to with regards to your skill set, your essential skills, things like teamwork, time management, etc. Typically, you're going to be asked for 3 professional or academic references. So these can be folks that you've worked with on an internship, perhaps a client that you've worked with if you have been doing freelance work, or they could be faculty at Art Center, a manager at a part-time job that you've worked. Generally speaking, folks who are able to speak to your skill set and your ability to work well in a team with deadlines and working on certain projects. When we're submitting our references, we generally want to be able to submit the name of the person, the company name or organization through which we're connected to them, the title that they hold or our relationship to them, something like supervisor, manager, colleague, etc., and then their contact information, which ideally should include email address and phone number, or at the very least, one of those two. On this note, as we're thinking about preparing in advance, it's really important to reach out to your references before you submit their information in an application to confirm that they are willing and able to provide you with a reference, right? This is something that's really great to get into the practice of in general, but especially if it is your first round of applications, and especially if you are using academic references from your faculty at Art Center, we want to make sure that they're available and that they know that they may potentially be contacted about this type of application so that they're able to speak to your skill set, your, amazing abilities as it relates to this opportunity, and that they have the time and availability to do so. What we don't want to happen is we list a reference because we think, well, they told me 6 months ago that they would be happy to provide me with a reference. And so everything should be good to go, right? And then at the time that we are sending in our application and the company is reaching out for references, that particular reference is out of the country on vacation or, with their family, or in the middle of a really busy term or period where it's really not in their schedule to be able to hop on the phone or provide a recommendation letter. Doing this kind of confirmation process in advance, again, before we even start the application, is going to help us know if we need to pivot and find a new reference or an additional reference, as well as give us the opportunity to share out what opportunity we're applying for and why we think that we're a really good fit so that our reference is even better able to speak to our skill set as it relates to that role. So the next thing that I would love to run through are some of the elements of an application. And we're going to talk about these a little bit broadly, but we're also going to be able to see them on this sample application that I've created in a Google form that you'll all be able to access and run through if you'd like to see how they specifically can be formatted or structured. So first thing, we usually start with the basics, your personal information, your name, your contact info, and an address, or more generally, a location. We want to be able to share both an email and a phone number that we can be contacted through. And especially for those of us who are nearing graduation and are kind of planning on sending out applications in advance of graduation or over the graduation period, make sure that you're using an email address that you check regularly and that you're going to have long time access to. You will stop having access to your Art Center email address about 1 term after you graduate, and you'll be eligible for an alumni email address, but you may want to consider using a different primary contact email for these types of applications to make sure that you don't miss out on anything or any kinds of follow-up. After our personal information questions or our details, we typically will get some employment eligibility questions. And we're going to see what these look like very shortly. But generally speaking, they're asking us to confirm baseline details of the skill set that we need to perform the job, that we're authorized to work, and that we are eligible to perform the responsibilities that the company has of us or the expectations that the company has of us. Then we're usually submitting our professional materials. So again, this is our resume, our cover letter, and our portfolio. And my biggest recommendation is going to be that when you have the opportunity to submit a cover letter, please do. They're not always going to be a required material, but anytime that you can submit a cover letter, I recommend doing so. It's a really, really wonderful way to add depth and dimension to yourself as an applicant and to your application materials. So consider making it part of your application practice. Then we have the education section, and this will include needing to share out your school and typically your degree name, and sometimes potentially your graduation year, or whether you are a currently enrolled student or if you've already graduated. Note that the degree name is sometimes something that they might be cross-checking against that list of degree names from the job description, where it says seeking candidates with a bachelor's degree in graphic design or fine art. They might potentially be looking for that kind of cross-check to make sure that your degree name matches up. But generally speaking, they're looking for confirmation that you're enrolled or have recently completed a degree program that aligns with what they need for this particular position. Then we're going to be asked to share out our experience. And sometimes this means not just listing what we've done and our dates of employment or dates of projects, but providing a description of what we did for those projects as well. My biggest recommendation here is to use the description that is on your resume. The resume that we've prepared in advance of this application, we can just copy and paste that description directly into this section of the application so that everything aligns and kind of mirrors the different facets of information that we're submitting to this particular employer. If for whatever reason you have to edit it down, that's completely okay. Just make sure that you are choosing to edit down information that doesn't present a different version of your experience than what is presented on your resume. At the same time, make sure that you're not including different experience or different types of information than what you've presented on your resume. Everything should line up and be kind of able to be cross-checked. For those of us who have gone through an ATS system before, you might have seen that the system will try to pull information from your resume and automatically fill out this section of an application. Sometimes it does it really well, and sometimes it is either missing pieces or things need to be adjusted. This is why it's really important for us to have an ATS-friendly version of our resume that can be scanned and pull that information out well. But again, even if it pulls the information out, go in and double check just to make sure that it is representing these experiences correctly and in alignment with the description that you just sent out. Our next area here typically falls under the category of demographic information. And very often, this information is voluntary. And you'll see that it's voluntary and that you have the option to not answer every time that these questions are asked. So these types of questions might potentially include identifying your gender or your race or ethnicity or your disability status. And again, this information is by and large not going to the hiring manager. It's being used as aggregate data by the Human Resources Department to better understand who's applying for positions at this company and kind of getting an understanding of those demographic statistics. You are welcome to select prefer not to answer, or no answer, or whatever that kind of final neutral option is, if you do not want to share out this information. However, just know that it is not going to the hiring manager and isn't really brought into the hiring process. It's just used in aggregate by human resources. And then finally, we have some version of a confirmation and submission page. The confirmation page will usually have some kind of checkbox that says, in paraphrase, I confirm that all of the information that I have submitted is accurate to the best of my knowledge at the time of submission. As in, I didn't lie or share inaccurate information, and everything that I'm sharing with you is up to date as of the day that I submitted. This is so that if for whatever reason somebody fills out information that is not entirely accurate, the company is able to go back and say, you shared that this was accurate information, and it turned out that it wasn't. And so unfortunately, that can affect your eligibility for a position. This is, again, why it's really important to double check what information they're asking of us, make sure that we've checked our documents, we've confirmed with our references, all of this in advance of starting the application itself, so that we can make sure that we can check that confirmation and submission button as accurately and honestly as possible. We ideally don't want to get into a situation where we submit information, it is not wholly either accurate or representative of what we would like to share, and then it potentially impacts our application in any way. Now, these elements, which again, we'll be able to see in our sample form, are going to appear potentially in this order, potentially in a slightly different order, but in general will all appear in some way in an online form. So it's really, again, helpful to know that you might encounter these, that they are going to be part of your application process, and that you may end up filling out, multiple of them in the long run. So let's talk about some other things that we can keep in mind as part of our application process, namely knockout questions, right? These are always a fun topic that I think maybe we don't think about as part of our application, but are really important to remember. So knockout questions are questions that are designed to allow an ATS system or recruiters to quickly eliminate candidates that lack the essential qualifications or are not suitable for the role in some way or another. If we think back to our previous slide where we talked about those employment eligibility questions, a lot of those are structured or designed in an application to be knockout questions, where they're looking for applicants who can select yes or a number or what have you, and those that don't select the right answers are automatically filtered out of the applicant pool. So these are often formatted in yes or no questions, as in, yes, I have this experience, or no, I don't. And essentially, as I mentioned, they're acting as a filter so that the only applicants that move forward to the next phase of the process are those that meet the minimum required criteria. Answering knockout questions honestly and accurately, again, is really important for kind of the health and long-term prospects of our application. If we answer a knockout question kind of inaccurately or not with best representation of ourselves and our experience, and it's later found out that, we weren't answering that question accurately, it can potentially impact our application. So again, really important to be mindful of answering these questions accurately and reading them in full to understand what they're asking of us. What are some examples of knockout questions? It might be something like, do you have a minimum of 3 years of experience in design or in a specific area of design? It might also say something like, do you have experience using Adobe Photoshop? Or have you ever worked on, a car designed by this company previously? right? And they're looking to confirm that, again, you're meeting the minimum level of previous experience that is required in this role. Another knockout question might look like, do you have a valid California driver's license? This again is to confirm that if you need to drive or travel for this role, that you're able to do so. They're asking that question because it's something that they are requiring for the role, and something that should be considered as kind of necessary to perform the role to its fullest capacity. And then the last one here that I want to just take a little bit of extra time on is a question that I think a lot of folks can find difficult if you're an international student and you are looking for work or an internship in the United States. So the question is, do you now or will you in the future require sponsorship, employment visa sponsorship or employment sponsorship, or some variation of those words? This question is a little bit tricky because as international students, if you're taking an internship, you have CPT authorization through your F1 visa. So you are authorized to work without sponsorship with CPT. And then following graduation, you have OPT for between 1 and 3 years. And again, you are eligible to work without needing sponsorship on that specific section of your visa as well. So this question can feel a little bit difficult to answer. Generally speaking, the question will be phrased this way when they are not open to considering applicants who require sponsorship at any point in time during their employment. That's not going to be the case every single time, but usually this phrasing is specifically for anybody who will require sponsorship at any point in time, whether that is following the end of your OPT or any time in between. Answer this question to the best of your ability and as honestly as possible. If you would like to chat through the pros and cons of sharing that you need sponsorship versus not sponsorship, again, Amy and myself would be happy to chat through that in an advising appointment. But know that this question is usually present because they are either not able to consider sponsorship or it's something that will impact the application that you're submitting in some way. For the record, if you select no, I do not require sponsorship, and then you do require sponsorship, usually, again, it will impact your application process just maybe later on down the line rather than initially. Though again, this is a really personal question and the way that you approach it is very personal as well. Some other things to keep in mind, and this is one that I think is really important, is the structure of applications often includes website timeout or application timeout. So very often, job and internship applications are designed to time out automatically after a certain period. Sometimes this is half an hour, sometimes it's an hour. Sometimes they don't time out at all, but they kind of are designed to not allow the form to be left open for an unending period of time. So I would really recommend planning to begin and complete your application in one sitting. And ideally, again, preparing a lot of those materials in advance so that once you're ready to begin the application, you can quickly run through, add in all of your information and click submit before you start to get that timeout notification. What we want to avoid doing is losing our progress, starting the application, getting 75% of the way, stepping away to make lunch, and then realizing that we've come back, the website's timed out, and we've lost all of the progress we've made, which can feel really frustrating when we're trying to submit multiple applications and really get through our process. But also, we just want to be able to kind of use our time as best possible. And again, do that preparation before we even start the application so that once we're doing it, it's adding in a few documents, uploading a few files, adding in this information and answering these questions, and then we click submit and we're good to go. And of course, we want to remember to save copies of our tailored application materials. Now, how you choose to do this is really dependent on your own preferences for organization, but a way that I would recommend is buy files with the company name. This is really, really helpful because you can go back to those materials because you're all so amazing and talented, you get the opportunity to interview, you can remind yourself of how you described certain skills, certain projects, certain experiences that you've done in the past. And then what your cover letter said about why you're so excited about this opportunity. It's really great to refresh our memory and remind ourselves, here's how I phrased that project, or I did include this experience, but not the other. We don't want to be walking into an interview scenario, not remembering exactly how we talked about our experience, and then bringing up things that maybe we thought we included but didn't, and that our prospective employer isn't super familiar with. So try to remember to keep these organized. Again, find an organizational system that works for you, but formatting with file names by company will allow you to drop in every element that you need to for that application, go back and check on them at a later date, or at the very least, you have this kind of tracked list of previous applications that you've tailored that you feel great about that you can utilize in the long run. So our last little note here before we open ourselves up for questions and thoughts and any other thing that anybody wants to chat through is following up on an application. So when following up on an application, it's important to consider if we can follow up and how. So first and foremost, does the company want to be contacted? Sometimes you'll see in an application, please do not follow up, or please do not reply to your email confirmation. We will reach out to you if and when we are ready to interview. If that's the case, again, we want to follow the instructions that we've been given by the employer and decide, okay, I'm not going to follow up. I'm going to follow the instructions that I've been provided. If we've not been given those specific instructions, and it seems that either the company wants to be contacted or that they haven't stated anything one way or the other, then we can ask ourselves, have I previously met with somebody who I could confirm my application submission with? Maybe I met with the design supervisor at a career chat at Art Center hosted by Creative Careers. Or maybe I participated in a sponsored studio and I was able to meet them and introduce myself. Or maybe even I'm connected with them on LinkedIn because I know that they post a lot of job opportunities. And so I can send them a quick LinkedIn message that says, hi there, thank you so much for sharing out that opportunity. I recently submitted my application. I'm so excited to be considered and would love the opportunity to meet with you and chat through my experience. Going through the process of having somebody who you can confirm your submission with, again, maybe before you even start the application, is a really helpful tool because it allows you to have that direct follow-up. However, you may not have that opportunity. And if that's the case, that's completely okay. Not every time that we submit a digital application are we going to be able to follow up formally with somebody, with a particular person or a general email, but when we have the opportunity to do so, it's really helpful. When we're following up, we want to consider a couple of best practices. Number one, we want to plan to follow up maybe 1 to 2 weeks following our application submission or in recognition of the deadline of the application. So for example, if we submit our application today and the deadline for the application submissions is March 1st, that's more than 2 weeks away, and we may want to hold off on following up until they fully closed the submissions and they're ready to start reviewing applications in full, right? But if we don't know when the deadline is or it's open, then generally speaking, we can plan for 1 to 2 weeks following the submission of our application. When we're following up, we want to be clear and concise. We don't need to rewrite our cover letter and have multiple paragraphs of information. We can share a nice, concise, and minimally detailed message that includes our interest, again, in the position, highlighting skills or experience that are a really, really wonderful fit for the role, and then closing out with a lot of gratitude and saying, thank you in advance for considering my application. I look forward to the opportunity to meet with you. Thank you again. My colleagues have shared in the chat some resources for constructing a follow-up or a thank you message, and kind of how to go about best email etiquette for something like this. Again, make sure that you're following any of the specifications that the company has listed about being contacted, and that we're following good email etiquette and follow-up practices with a nice, short, concise email that's very gracious, and just reiterates our interest in what we're looking for. So, in summary for today, we want to make sure that we're preparing our application materials before we even start our application. That's our resume, our cover letter, making sure that our portfolio looks the way that it's meant to. Then we want to make sure that we're reading all applications thoroughly to make sure that we know what they're asking and that we can select that confirmation and submission button in good faith. And then, of course, we want to plan to complete our application in one sitting, ideally to avoid losing our progress. Now, as mentioned, we do have a sample application form that I would love to encourage everybody to take a look at. You can give it a nice practice if you'd like to, or I'm happy to walk through some elements of it with our last few minutes today if we would like that. But for right now, I would love to open the floor up to any questions or thoughts or concerns that anybody has. You are welcome to put those in the chat, or you're welcome to unmute yourself and ask them out loud if you're open to that. And I will stop our recording for the moment so that we can tackle some questions.